Starting seeds, staking tomatoes, planting a pollinator garden, or transforming your backyard into a private oasis takes hard work, know-how, and a passion for plants. Unlike most of you guys, I'm always looking for trustworthy advice as well as tips and techniques to make my gardens even better. That's why I know you'll love becoming a member of our growing online gardening community called All Access. The folks here at Fine Gardening are always adding new videos, planting plans, regional expertise, and our hugely popular new project guides, which are all for members only, because every gardener wants to become better at the craft they love. Learn more at finegardening.com/all access. Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Argue About Plants, the podcast for people who love plants.
Just not always the same ones. I'm Carol Collins. I'm the associate editor at Fine Gardening.
And I'm Danielle Sherry. I'm the executive editor. You guys know who we are by this time, right? Yeah, we don't need to tell you. But thanks for tuning in for this episode, our first episode of the new year. Happy New Year, Carol.
Happy New Year to you. Let it be a better one than last year, right?
Right? I mean, we just keep getting better. 2021 was a little bit better than the disaster that was 2020, and here we are in 2022. And we decided to kick off the new year with kind of an interesting topic. I don't believe we've done any fashion or iteration of this topic before, and it's best self-sowers, or our favorite self-sowing plants. And I don't know about you, Carol, but I had a really hard time finding plants that self-sow nicely.
Yes, polite ones.
Polite self-sowers. So maybe that should be the new topic because, I will fully admit I like some obnoxious self-sowers, but then the second that I started researching it and, all of a sudden it's like invasive alert, aggressive plant could be coming on to the invasive alert soon. I'm like, oh man, this is a rough one. So you ran into similar issues.
Yeah, and I think that part of the problem is that there are things that are not problematic for us here in the Northeast, but in other parts of the country. So I feel like, because we have a national audience, just as long as we're aware of that, people know, right, that if you can't grow something, they know it, but
Yeah. I mean, at least one of my plants, it will have a giant asterisk on it, and I will let you know, hey, Oregon, you can't grow this plant. Please don't grow this plant.
I think our expert has some you can't grow in Oregon or California, so she's in the Midwest.
Stay tuned, California and Oregon, though. I do have some plants that you can grow, and I think Carol from her smile also does as well. So, Carol, kick us off. Oh, well, and here's the thing, too. I was all over the place. I have some perennials. I have some annuals. I don't have a shrub. This is a first. I do not have a shrub. Do you have a mix?
I do, but no shrubs or trees. There are some, of course, that self-seed, but it takes a darn long. It's
You're
not
right.
as gratifying as the perennials and annuals.
Yeah, you're totally right. It does. It takes so long. I mean, that's a lot of the reason that, trees and shrubs are a bit more expensive, because if they are seed grown, it takes a good 5, sometimes more years before they can be sold at the nursery. So, yeah. All right. So we've got perennials and annuals. What are you going to kick me off with, a perennial or an annual?
This is a perennial. And it is derived from North American natives. And so that question of is it going to get invasive is, not as much of an issue with this one. So I like Mecana Giants Columbine. That's Aquilegia Mecana Giants, and they are hardy from zones 3 to 8. So super winter hardy. The giants is because they get much bigger than your average columbine. They get 24 to 30 inches tall and 18 to 24 inches wide. They make a nice big clump, tons of flowers. They like full sun to partial shade if you're in the south definitely put them in some shade because they do not love to get hot and dry. So in the South, or, in a hotter climate, extra water, shade will help. They like humus rich, well-drained soil. So sort of think woodsy, mulchy soil. This mix has been around a long time. This was a 1955 All-American Selections winner, and it was introduced by Burpee, and they still carry it, and several other seed sources also carry it. I got mine from Johnny's. It's a nice mix of colors. They are mostly bicolor flowers, and they have purple and this beautiful indigo, yellow, red, sometimes mixed with cream or white. And it blooms at a nice time of year in late spring into early summer. So think around the same time that your roses do their first flush. And hummingbirds love them.
Oh, cool.
And they have great foliage. So when they're done blooming, you still get these mounds of like ferny, bluish foliage. And those last all season long. And they're even a little bit winter hardy, although by the end of winter, they'll be raggedy and the new flush of leaves will come up to replace them. And once they get going, they are generous seed producers. They make those sort of distinctive seed heads that, you can pick them and they rattle and they're just loaded with seeds and you can spread them around. They're a little harder to start indoors because they take so long to germinate. They can take up to a month to germinate. And I actually gave up on some of mine, put new seeds into the tray, and then I had columbines coming up in the vegetable garden. So you have to be patient if you're doing starts with these. But they really grow very happily from seed. If you just, spread the seed somewhere where you want them to grow, next year you'll see the tiny little babies coming up. And it takes them 2 years to get from that stage to actually producing flowers.
Oh, nice. Now they're not a biennial by any means, are they, Carol?
No, the plants are very long lived. I have some now that are 5 or 6 years old, and then new ones kind of come along near the parent plants. And it feels like I'm sort of getting new colors in the second generation, although they're not as big as the parent plants. So it's kind of fun. Yeah, I like having the mix because it's like exciting to see what the seedlings will do.
Yeah. I mean, the second that you said, it takes 2 years to bloom, my mind immediately goes to, a biennial where, you're just getting foliage the first year and then the second year is when you get blooms and then it kicks it. But I love the foliage of columbine. I mean, you touched on it. It's something that looks like it should be ephemeral. It looks like it should be in that bleeding hearts realm where it blooms and then it basically defoliates and it goes away. But it's so beautiful. It's almost maidenhair furnish. It gives me those vibes when I see it.
Yeah, it looks really nice in masses because that foliage it's gorgeous.
Yeah. Just like delicate and just beautiful and kind of paper. It just makes you want to, go up and kind of pet it softly, basically. That's an awesome one. That's really, really cool. Now, you had said, if you take the seeds and spread it, will it do it on its own if you just kind of, let it be? Or if you're lazy or forgetful, like say Danielle is, will it do its own thing without me having to intervene and crush up those seed pods?
It absolutely will. But the seedlings will be very close to the parent plants.
Gotcha.
And so, if you want to fill a bed up, it will do that all on its own over the course of time. And if there are any that you're like, not there, you can just pull them out. They don't transplant really well because they tend to have a big taproot. So they're really easier if you're going to be gifting this to somebody, give them a few seed heads, and that's probably better.
Okay, I gotcha. That's awesome. Well, I'm going to go from your very refined, delicate, beautiful foliage to a plant that does not have refined foliage at all. It's very much in your face. It's coarse. It's vole proof, which is great. And it's a euphorbia, and it's myrtle spurge or donkey tail spurge, which is Euphorbia mercenites, zones 5 to 9. Okay, so this is the asterisk plant. I'm just going to get it out of the way right up front. If you live west of the Rockies, this could be a bit of a problematic plant. Now, surprisingly, it does not appear on any state or national invasive list, but west of the Rockies, it can be a little bit of a beast, a little obnoxious, if you will. But east of the Rockies, this has become such a great plant for me. And I think basically because it self-sows into very problematic areas. It self-sows into my vole superhighway. It self-sows into my areas of my garden, which are truly the worst soil ever. You know, we had put in the patio and all that stone dust kind of sloshed off to one corner. And despite all the amending I've done, it is literally just gravel at this point. So this myrtle spurge will basically self-sow itself into those teeny tiny little areas, which I don't know what it's living off of. Stone dust? I mean, it seems impossible to me, but it's such a lovely plant. It has I think of it as looking like one of those sea anemones that are at the bottom of the ocean with kind of these long tentacle-ish like branches. And then it has whorls of this blue-green glaucous needly like leaves on it. It's very coarse. It's very crunchy. But yet that blue green is really beautiful because it's a kind of a hue you don't see much in the garden. And so it does that. It is even here in the Northeast in stinking cold Connecticut, it is still very evergreen. It holds itself all through the winter. So, you know, right now I'm looking outside. We just got our first snowfall and it's still going strong. But what I really love is in spring, this low grower, it only gets about 8 inches tall by maybe a foot wide. This low grower gets these yellow, green, chartreuse, panically looking flowers on it. And those show up here in Connecticut in the Northeast in March. So it's one of the first things in my garden. I mean, I have pictures of it with the grape hyacinths. That's how early it blooms. And the pollinators go bananas over it because it's one of the first earliest thing. And of course, it's that umbel shape that they love so much. So there's always pollinators all over it. In my garden, it has politely self-sown. It has popped up here, there, and I will say it's very easily removed from spots that you don't want it because you immediately notice it. You know, it can't be mistaken for much else because it's this bright blue green and you're like, oh, nope, buddy, try again, and you pluck it out and you're done. I've already mentioned the poor soil factor. So full sun, well drained, lean, really crappy soil. This is such a great plant for that. Caveat, like with all euphorbias, it produces when you pluck it or prune it or, snap a stem, it produces that milky sap that really does irritate the skin. It is toxic, and hence the reason that the deer don't eat it, the chipmunks don't eat it, the voles don't eat it. So it's basically bomb proof. So again, that's myrtle spurge, that's Euphorbia mercenites, and that's zones 5 to 9. If you're east of the Rockies, go out and grab some because it does self-sow beautifully. If you're west of the Rockies, best to find a different Euphorbia, and there's about 8 billion, so you have plenty to choose from. So, Carol, what's up next on your list over there?
So my next one is more of an annual, although it is perennial in zones 8 to 10, and it is mealy cup sage, and the specific cultivars are Victoria Blue and Victoria White, which are more compact than the species. So these sages get 1 to 2 feet tall, maybe 1.5 feet wide, so they're a little more narrow habit, densely branched. And they like evenly moist, well-drained soil, although I must say I do not spoil them and they're fine without extra water. And in a Connecticut summer, they probably need a little extra water elsewhere. These are native to Texas and Mexico. And I think that the name mealy cup sage comes from maybe someone describing the white one, because the little flowers, it's like sort of that typical two-lipped sage flower, and they're white and they almost do look like they've been dusted with flour. Um,
Mm.
and so I like growing the white and the blue together because it provides nice contrast. The white is like a little brightness. You do have to deadhead it when it starts getting that, dirty tissue look, but but so I grew these as starts. It takes the seedlings are very tiny, so you do have to start them quite far ahead of time, like 6 to 8 weeks before your final frost. So I grew, dozens of these, and I sort of tucked them in all over. And let me tell you, they made it through a winter here in Connecticut.
Wow.
They did. And I don't know, I cannot count on that happening again, but I was surprised because I was expecting something only hardy to zone 8 would not make it through. So I had grown another batch, and then the first batch came through the winter. So I had a lot last year.
You had more sage than you knew what to do with at that point.
But fortunately, it's a super nice plant. And then I discovered that there were seedlings where I had not, near the parent plants, but I definitely hadn't planted them there. So I love it. The blue especially, I think, makes a lot of seed. I haven't seen any white seedlings yet. I think they're maybe a little less vigorous and maybe don't seed in as easily. But that's what I'm looking forward to next year, is finding out, do I have more seedlings? Did the original plants from the last 2 years, did they make it through? But this is just a fun bedding plant. Even if you have to grow it from scratch every year, it comes quite easily from seed, and it looks great with all kinds of other plants. With the blue really picks up a lot of other colors, and it has that color in the stem too. So like dark purpley blue stems. Yeah.
So what does the foliage on this sage look like, Carol? Because, I picture, there's Victoria blue, like that standard salvia that you see in annual packs. It's kind of shiny and kind of a elongated leaf. And then there's salvias that have, more of a, almost like a basil rosette of hairy, large-leaved foliage. What does this one's leaves look like?
So they are not hairy. They do have that sort of elongated shape that a lot of sages have. And just a medium green, nice clean foliage that nothing eats it, including deer, because it has that typical sagey smell. Yeah. So the deer leave it alone, and the bugs leave it alone. Pollinators love the flowers, though. So that, it's a nice little useful plant. And not native to all of North America, but I think close enough that the pollinators know what to do with it.
Nice. That's awesome. I'm going to have to look that up. Oh, I have to look at a photo, and that reminds us, we got to remind everybody. We always get emails from you guys saying, like, what does that look like? Where's the photo? I need the plant list. Go on to finegardening.com. There's a podcast tab right up at the top on the right-hand side. Click on that. You'll see our show notes. Carol and I are really diligent about getting photos of all the plants we talk about, and also giving you plant lists too. So yeah, don't, as we say, don't get in a car accident trying to write down these names. You can just go to the website and get everything. Well, so I'm just going to go with a plant that I wasn't planning on going on, but is native in a similar area that you were just talking about. So this is like Southwest native Texas into Mexico. And it's Mexican speckled Tenentia. And it's Tenentia pringlei, zone 6 to 10. And this goes by a bunch of different names. I mean, you'll see it as Panther Tenentia. You'll see it with some other saucy names that I'm not going to say, but it's in the spiderwort family. So picture a spiderwort. And this is a plant which was a gift plant. This was a plant that I went down to Tennessee to photograph a garden. It was Robin Brown's garden. She had a dry shade, beautiful design that we featured many years ago. And I kept seeing this really cool plant that was about maybe 12 inches tall, maybe about 10, 11 inches wide, about the same. These pillowy mounds, and for her, in her garden, they were all along the edges of her walkways. And it's a green leaf that's kind of succulent looking, kind of teardrop shaped, with splashes of dark purple on it. And then the underside was completely purple. And at the time that I went down there, it also had these beautiful little amethyst colored star flowers all over it. Tiny, very tiny, but in a mass. And I got obsessed with this plant. I kept asking her, like, what is this? Tell me what it is again. And so as I was leaving, she literally grabbed with her hand and ripped a chunk of it out, threw it in a shopping bag, and basically sent me on my way on the plane with this shopping bag full of soil, basically. So through TSA, I went, had it next to me on my seat the whole way home. And I threw it in the garden and thought, well, Tennessee, that's a little bit warmer climate than us, but it's zone 6 to 10 that supposedly it's hardy to. I have seen also 7. So there are years when this has died completely down to the ground for me and not come back. But it self-sows. And it pops up in the most serendipitous spots in my garden. Again, some of the tougher spots in the gravel, along the edges of my pathways. But the thing that I love about it is this plant is growing in my garden, and I've seen it elsewhere grow from full sun, hot baking sun all day long, to full shade. Now in full shade, it's a bit darker. It tends to look more of like purpley than having that mottled leaf. And in full sun, you really get that, wow, it looks like it's been splatter painted. That's when you really see that mottling a bit more. It's a daylight flower, so it opens up, those tiny flowers open up in the daytime and close at night, which is just, kind of a cute little charming aspect. But yeah, these billowy mounds are just everywhere in my garden. And I have a really hard time with finding a cohesiveness in my garden. Like I've got the sun section and it has its sun plants. And then I've got the shade section, which is small, and it has its plants. But this is a plant that, will sow itself in both areas and make you look like a really good designer because, oh, look at that. Look at it. It's cohesive. It all goes together naturally. So I just adore it. The pollinators adore it too. For us here in the East, it starts coming into bloom in late summer and then goes all the way up to a hard freeze, which is kind of cool. I have, I'm actually, instead of a post of a picture, I'm going to post a little video of this because I took a picture of some pollinators on this plant this summer, and they're just going really bananas. And I love to see it because they seem really frantic because it's the end of the season. So they're just like gathering up as much as they can. And that's one of the last things to bloom in my garden, and they pretty much love it. So again, that's Mexican speckled Tinantia, and it's in the spiderwort family. Kind of an unknown. Do you know this plant, Carol?
I had never heard of it, but it sounds so cool. And what a neat color to have, spread through your garden.
Yeah, it is. It's neat. It's weird. It's a little different. And it's definitely a self-sower. All right, Carol, you gave us a perennial. You gave us an annual. I mean, if I was a betting lady, I would say you're going to give us another annual.
No, I'm coming back to perennials with this
and
one.
The house wins again.
And this is not a self-seeder. It is a self-sporer. So,
no way. No, sorry. Can't do that one. It doesn't count. It doesn't count. No, go ahead. I like it.
You can't take it away from me. I already have a picture.
Yes. All right. Go. All right. You win.
So this is Japanese painted fern, Ethereum nipponicum, zones 5 to 8. It gets 6 to 12 inches tall and up to 24 inches wide. It forms clumps and it sort of spreads by rhizomes. It likes full to partial shade, definitely a shade plant, and moist, acidic, humus-rich soil, so sort of woodsy soil. This is going to be a familiar plant for a lot of people, I think. You can grow it sort of all through fine gardening land except the colder zones. And we see this plant a lot in fine gardening shade articles. We see it on the garden photo of the day. It's a nice filler because it does form those clumps. And I got mine at the library plant sale, so it's generous. Like you can take a clump and break it up and make a bunch of different plants, and those plants will bulk up very quickly once you get them in the ground. So I've had this one in my garden for decades, and I have discovered that little baby plants will pop up in kind of unusual places. But when they find that, when the spores float through the air, they find that perfect spot. They will germinate there. And I've got one that went under the deck, and I just imagine that little spore getting blown through the air. And it's like under the deepest, darkest reaches under my deck. And it's like, perfect. I'm going to make a fern.
I'm still in shock. Like, if anybody's watching the YouTube video of this, my mouth is agape because I have painted ferns. I've never noticed them. I must not have good conditions because I've never noticed them procreate. I'm so bummed. I apparently do not have a good fern womb or something. I don't know what's happening.
Well, you did say you don't have much shade, and that really is a requirement for them. And yeah, so I think that's probably why. But it cracked me up. I'm like, go you. The deck fern is still there. I couldn't bear to move it.
I love it.
But something is a prolific plant if it's a pass-along plant. So, whether you are propagating it by division or, getting those lucky sporelings, this is just a fun plant to have. Love this color for shade, that frosty color with the purple centers. That's just a fun thing to have, and it mixes well with other plants.
It is, and you get such variation too on Japanese painted ferns. Of course, they've come up with 8 million cultivars now too of it, but just like the straight Japanese painted fern, you get purples and greens and silver, and it's just these colors that you don't often see in the garden, period, let alone in the shade. So it's a dynamic plant. But man, I'm stinking bummed. I wonder if it's because I mulch so much, and maybe that's covering up. Oh my gosh, am I killing my little fern babies? I'm gonna have to pay attention next year and see if I've got anything popping up beforehand. I've never known them to spread, so I'm excited. All right, stick a pin in it, I guess. I think one and only, let's see, I'm trying to decide between something I call an annual and something I call a perennial. But all right, I will go with foxglove, which is digitalis, species and cultivars aplenty, zones 4 to 9. This is a true biennial. For the most part, there are perennial foxgloves that you can get, but that's a different animal altogether. This is for the most part the straight species digitalis, or straight genus digitalis. Purpurea, I think, is the most common that people know. But this is a biennial, so you're going to get these rosettes of large, kind of long tongue-like, furry, fuzzy, gray-green leaves that'll come up the first year. And then the second year, there are these rockets that everybody knows and loves from seeing them in, Beatrix Potter stories and, English gardening magazines. 2 to 5 feet tall, these flower stalks can get, and they really can, because I'm only 5 foot and I can look some of mine in the eyeball. They beautiful trumpety flowers that kind of form this large panicle. They have an array of colors: white, purple, pink, and the throat has some speckles and some dots in it. And my understanding is that signals pollinators to come in deeper, my lovely, so that they can come and actually gather the pollen. This is a full sun to partial shade plant. Several of mine have actually self-sown into full shade, but they just don't really kind of size up as big as the ones that are in full sun to partial shade. Well-drained soil, moist Soil, especially to get self-sowing and some germination. I have found that in the drier areas of the garden, I won't get as many of these to self-sow. But that second year they put on that glorious flower show. You feel like, you're kind of strolling through Sissinghurst, looking at all these beautiful, beautiful foxgloves. And that's it. Then the plant dies, the mother plant dies. But luckily, they create these huge panicles of seeds, and they're kind of like these little itty bitty green marbles that then go to a tawny brown color. And I have to thank the chickadees of East Haddam, Connecticut, where I live, because they go to town on those seeds and they just peck the heck out of them. And as they're doing it, they're messy little eaters and seeds are flying everywhere. And I generally get quite an array of little seedlings the next year. I planted foxglove once. And that was probably 6 or 7 years ago. And I have had foxgloves every single year since. And it's great because, now at this point, I'm getting blooms every year, so I've transitioned into the point where I've got some that are just foliage and then some that are blooming, and I've got that staggeredness. But I feel like it's an obvious choice. I feel like, late spring, it's just a beautiful flower to have. But I had to mention foxglove because I think a lot of people say, oh, it's just a biennial. I'm not going to pay a 1 gallon perennial price for this. But yeah, it's actually a perennial because it does self-sow year after year. It's worth it.
Yes, and such a beauty. What a
It is.
fun, yeah. Did you see in the old fine gardening test garden the year after we moved out and we had taken a lot of the plants over to the new location? The digitalis over there had really sown in, and that year was
Nice.
just gorgeous. Yeah, it
No,
was.
no, I don't remember that. I mean, I remember the transplants that we took to the new test garden, but oh no, I didn't realize that. They were like, "All right, see you guys, bye. We're going to put on our best show now."
Yeah, we took all the other plants out of the way for them and they took over. And yeah, it's a shame because that became a construction site. So no more digitalis there, but what a year
Oh,
that was.
that's so awesome. That's all. Yeah, it's a great plant and it perpetuates long after it's supposed by. All right, Carol, fourth and final self-sower. Did you save the
Okay.
best for last?
Well, I saved the tastiest one for last.
I was going to be so upset if you, Miss Vegetable Garden, did not have an edible on this list. So thanks for not letting me down.
There are some really fun edibles that self-sow. And this is one of my favorites. This is Honsai Thai mustard. That's a
Say
brass.
that 3 times
You
fast.
really can't say that too many times without messing it up. That's a Brassica rapa cultivar from Asia, and it's an annual. It likes full sun. It likes moist, fertile garden soil. So, you grow it in the veggie garden, but I suspect you could grow this in garden beds too. Um, the leaves are sort of, think about like bok choy or
Hmm.
Chinese cabbage, sort of that taste, and that they have a white midrib and they have a nice shape. When this plant is happy, it is a really good looking plant. It makes this sort of a big bushy thing of foliage, and then from that, these slender purple stalks come up, and they get little yellow flowers, and that is the part that people really like to eat. So these stalks are, kind of a little bit like broccoli or broccoli rabe.
Oh,
In fact, I
okay.
think some people call this like Chinese broccoli rabe, but you can stir fry them. You can eat them raw. Like you can, have it on your dipping, crudités plate for dipping. Um, so beautiful and delicious. It's like a garnish you can eat. Um, these plants, so I started these in my garden because I was doing an article on making your own salad mix. And so this was one of the ones that I was cutting as baby greens. And then some of them actually made flowers, but they do not, unlike a lot of salad greens, they do not really love to be planted in early spring because the heat of summer stresses them out and they will bolt. So before the plant gets really big and they just make a few flowers and then boom, they make seed. But the seedlings have a choice, right? They can decide when they germinate, and when they germinate in sort of later in the summer, and then they will bulk up sort of into fall, and then they'll flush those flower stalks, and that seems to be the ideal. So if I was growing this from seed that I had collected, I would probably plant it in midsummer and keep it really well watered and maybe give it a little shade, and then it should do better for you later in the season. So my wild plants, the ones that sort of grew in the path or in a bed nearby where I had originally had them, they're the ones that have done the best for me.
So I have just a general edible question. So is the flavor like broccoli rabe, or is the flavor, I've in my head when you first said the name of it, I was thinking like a little bit spicy, like an arugula.
A little bit, but definitely not as spicy as arugula, but it does have that similar sort of, it's like a mustard green kind of taste.
Okay.
Yeah, but the flowers especially are very sweet. So not quite as that bitter note that you get in the broccoli rabe. It's a little sweeter.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Okay. That's making my list because it sounds beautiful just as a plant. And then you can eat it too. That's, in my category, that's checking off 2 boxes. So that's a winner. I'm going to have to say the name again, Carol, just because I want you to have the tongue twister.
Hong Sai Tai.
Hong Sai Tai. All right. All right. That's a good one. You did not let me down. You had an edible. I'm excited. All right. So my last one is also an annual. And this is something that I believe either you or Steve or somebody, maybe Michelle years ago, grew at the office. We had a seed starting stand, and, everybody would kind of hop in there and grow their own seeds each year. And it would kind of be a mishmash, an array of different things. But this was Golden Jewels of Opar, which is Talanum paniculatum, aurea, zones 9 to 10. So really an annual, full sun, well-drained soil, a weird plant, but really, really cool. I feel like maybe Jewels of Opar has been discussed before in the podcast, but for anybody who's wondering, it's this really cool annual that has these large spade-like, almost succulent leaves that are this particular variety, a beautiful goldeny chartreuse color. Makes this, I feel like this is a theme with my plants this episode. It makes a nice rosette of foliage and gets pretty tall, 2 to 3 feet tall, but most of the height comes from about midsummer when it sends up these bright burgundy colored stalks out of the center of the plant and gets these beautiful tiny little pink flowers on wiry stems with a dot of yellow in the middle of them, and they just kind of dangle there like jewels, I guess. But then after that, the flowers go away. It's replaced by really cool little seed pods that are a bright magenta-y pink color. They pop open and kind of explode open and expose the inside, which is a little bit more like yellowy golden color. A lot of cut flower growers grow this plant not for when it's actually in flower, but when it puts on its seed, because the seeds are, it's kind of everlasting on those stems. So, it's something you throw into a cut arrangement and everything else in the arrangement has keeled over, but those Jewels of Opar stems are still going strong. It's got this beautiful in the garden kind of airy, diaphanous look where you can see through it. Just a really pretty plant. So, I took home a few seedlings from whoever ended up growing it at the office, and I'm like, whatever, I'll throw it in there. Did really, really well the first year, likes heat, obviously, like a lot of annuals. Bulked up, gave me a nice flower show. Okay, I figured that's it. It's over. It's an annual. And didn't you know it, the next year, I had Jewels of Opar coming up in my driveway. And that's the one thing I'll say about this plant is It doesn't self-sow where you want it to self-sow. It has a tendency to always want to be in my driveway for some reason. So it clearly needs that really well-drained soil and would prefer that above all other types of soil. So then I go in with my little spoon and I kind of get all the little seedlings and scoop them up out of the driveway and throw them back into the garden, and they do well. But, this had to have been 7 or 8 years ago, and I planted those initial seedlings from the office, and I still get 1 or 2 a year, jewels of opar just kind of popping up wherever they want to, and it perpetuates itself year after year after year. And so if it was you, Carol, thank you so much.
It wasn't, but I have some of them too. I think it was Steve, because he had given me a watch chain plant that's a type of sedum, a crassula, and in it they popped up seedlings. So he must have had this under jewels of opar. And I tell you what, is this one of those ones that's hardy in like zones 8 to 10, or is it an annual?
I was seeing zones 9 to 10, but I wouldn't be surprised if, maybe 8B, it's even hardy.
Because it has been, I have the same original plants. They drop their leaves in the winter, but then they come back again in the spring. And so for years, these same plants, they never really get very big because they have no resources. They're in this pot with this other plant, but they do make seeds. It's kind of cool.
That's so cool. I feel like you have like some sort of weird like wormhole microclimate going on over at your place. We've now found 2 plants that are clearly zone 8, if not 9, that are coming back in there in your garden.
Well, this one is a house plant. So this one comes in the winter time.
Okay. That now it explains it. Yeah, it's a cool plant overall. And you know how I feel about annuals. So if I'm hot to trot on this plant and it's an annual, then it's pretty cool. And now, because everything sounds better with a British accent, here's Peter to talk about his favorite self-sower.
When I first heard about today's topic, self-sowers, I thought, what, am I now part of a podcast dedicated to fabrics and handicrafts? But no, Danielle has reassured me this is a term used to describe plants that propagate themselves in the garden. I must say the idea appeals to me. As you devoted listeners surely know, I do occasionally dabble in a little gardening. Alas, it's not my only hobby, and I regrettably do not have the free time necessary to be a serious gardener. But if I can simply plant handfuls of annuals and perennials that reseed freely, filling every square inch of soil available without any intervention from me, well, sign me up, I say. With a quick search online, I discovered that this type of landscape is often labelled a serendipitous garden, and is often associated with the overflowing beds and borders found at English countryside homes. Yet another reason for me to embrace the aesthetic. As mentioned by Danielle, the self-sowing foxglove features prominently in children's books by Beatrix Potter, the English writer, illustrator, natural scientist and conservationist. And if a plant is good enough for Miss Potter, then certainly it deserves a space, or several spaces, in any of our gardens.
I love it when Peter agrees with me. He's a big foxglove fan. Who knew? I mean, anything English, right? He associates foxglove with England. So there you go. I get it. It's the motherland. So who do we have coming up on expert testimony, Carol?
We have Amanda Thompson from Chicago, and she'll be talking about some of her favorite self-sowers.
All right, let's see what Amanda has to say.
I'm Amanda Thompson, a horticulturist and author. I live just outside city limits of the city of Chicago, and that is Zone 6A. I wrote the book Kiss My Aster, the graphic guide to a fantastic yard, totally tailored to you. It's a graphic novel style choose-your-own-adventure book of home landscaping. It's silly and punk and yet practical, much like myself. I am going to talk to you about some reseeders, and let me just tell you that these are plants that work for me. I wouldn't recommend them to anyone without doing a complete background check, maybe some credit counseling. That being said, don't yuck my yum just because they work for me. I'm not saying that they'd work for you. If you don't want these plants, that's totally fine. If you don't want me to have them, Well, that's another problem entirely. Please practice this sentence. Hey, that's good for her. It's just not for me. I would say that well-behaved reseeders rarely make lists for podcasts. A plant that oversteps its designated area might be a bully, but I've learned over the years from writing about plants that plants aren't the only active bullies. Wink, wink. First up, bronze fennel. That is Feniculum vulgare purpureum. I'm looking at it right now. It gets to about 4 feet, maybe even 5 feet on a good day. It's zone 5 to 11, an annual in colder spots. And that's really, I think, where it needs to be. I don't think that this is a plant that needs to be grown anywhere warmer than where I'm at. Mine likes really good soil with extra protection and full sun. So it grows against walls or amidst other plants that kind of help, I think, break the wind. It is the first thing up in the spring. These little furry brown tails come up, I would say, early March, and those are edible. And I like to throw them in salads. It kind of looks like dill, but brown. I mean, not kind of. It does. It looks just like dill, but brown. And it has yellow umbels in the summer and seeds that persist most of winter. I can see all the seeds are up right now. I don't think anyone eats the seeds, spreads the seeds that way. So all the plants are where I kind of planted them 9 years ago. So I planted one plant 9 years ago. Now I have like 30 plants in 9 years. I don't see that as a problem personally. It doesn't spread by birds at all. I think that in my zone 6, 1 out of like every 6 or 7 plants is actually perennial, and the rest of them are just annuals. The annuals are easy to pull out of the ground if they're taking up too much space. The perennials have a crazy deep taproot, and they're really hard to get rid of. I think that's really all I have to say about bronze fennel. I know it's a problem plant in many places. It just isn't here, and I couldn't live without it. I love it so much. And we eat it in like everything. We are fennel maniacs. Next up is Dietrich's wild broccoli rob. That is Brassica rapa. It is, with flower spikes, is about 3 feet tall. I grow it in full sun in my garden beds. I'm not going to lie, it gets in my lawn. It looks great right now in the depths of December in Chicago. And it's all parts are edible. So I could pick the leaves and eat them right now. Obviously, the broccoli florets are what we're going for. The flowers are edible. The stalks are great in soup. Super productive, super tasty, super early plant. It does look like wild broccoli. It is attractive. The buds turn into flowers super quickly, so you have to be on your game. And it does seed out literally everywhere, which is a great impetus for you to get out there and eat the buds even quicker. And it's a cut and come again. So you really have to pay attention to this one, but it is super productive. It is everywhere, and it's delicious. I don't know how that could be a problem. I mean, I guess it could be a problem. Everything could be a problem. Moonflower, that's Datura inoxia. And here in my yard, it gets about 3 feet tall and 4 feet wide. I know it gets bigger other places, but that's just what I'm working with. It likes full sun. It likes ditches. That's where I fell in love with it, is growing in roadside ditches, which isn't usually a sentence I utter or you hear other gardeners say either. It likes lousy or disturbed soil. It's native to the southwestern United States, and it is sacred to many native people. It's a subshrub with grayish kind of leaves, kind of silvery leaves. And the flowers are huge, white, tube-shaped flowers, and they bloom only at night, and only one night only. Only one night only? Yeah, that's a sentence I'm going to use. Here's something that I've really found with them is that if tomato hornworms are a problem, I actually grow them not near the tomatoes, because the tomato hornworms, they can eat all the moonflower that they want, just stay off my tomatoes. So that actually has worked out really well for me. What else do I have to tell you about moonflower? The seed capsules, they're large and they're incredibly pokey. You could not comfortably hold one in your hand. They really are like a ball of needles, and then they bust open like a seed piñata, and those seeds absolutely get everywhere. I mean, like everywhere. And I just love this plant. I know it's a super common and pretty basic, but it's something that I can't seem to live without. Let's talk about purple shiso. That's Perilla frutescens crispa. And for here, it gets about 2 inches tall and about 1 foot wide in a decent spot. I think it likes more space than it gives itself in my yard. And I mean, really, it made that bed, so it has to lie in it. It likes full sun. Soil and water are optional. This stuff will grow in the crack of my driveway. And like I said, they chose their spots, so they should have to deal with the consequences. Deep purple leaves. The flowers are like a vague idea of flowers. They're not anything to really write home about. It kind of looks like a coleus that could come up literally anywhere in your yard, a free-ranging, dark-leaved coleus. The flowers are so not flashy that the seeds can really escape you. It really gets around. The nice thing I think about purple shiso is that, yeah, sure, it gets everywhere, but it's also super easy to pull up. It's never any effort to pull it up. So I use it kind of like a living mulch it fights other fast-growing weeds. And this one's edible. So I just don't have I can't think of any problems with that situation. I, just as a side note, have to tell you that the smell of purple shiso after a summer thunderstorm is absolutely chef's kiss.
I wish that I had an ounce of Amanda Thompson's energy. I mean, does she just drink coffee nonstop? I really think she must.
I think she is a lot of fun, isn't she?
She definitely is. I mean, I've never had so much fun hearing about self-sowers than just that.
Gardeners know best. There's always more to be done, more to learn, and more to enjoy once everything is blooming. Keep your green thumbs growing with the best of fine gardening archives, special interest books, and more. Plus, check out today's deal at tauntonsstore.com and save 30% in the Taunton store with code PODCAST.